we were purposefully delayed by the Pentagon from going to the Capitol for political reasons. Nancy Pelosi blamed Donald Trump for all of this. Even blamed Donald Trump for the National Guard not being there. He could have sent the National Guard, she said. General Milley, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as you know, was not a big fan of Donald Trump. He testified under oath that on January the 3rd, Donald Trump, in a phone call, ordered the National Guard to be deployed. People remember Cassidy Hutchinson, who was the Democrat star witness who worked in the White House. She had testified before the committee 3 times, and her testimonies lined up with everyone else that worked at the White House. After some communications back channel with Liz Cheney, she suddenly fired her attorney, and Liz Cheney provided her a new attorney pro bono, and she changed her testimony.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. Welcome back to AMAC's podcast, Better for America. Today, we're going to talk about the January 6th Select Committee and what the Democrats don't want you to know. The U.S. House Administration Committee has an oversight subcommittee, and they are the investigative body. It is chaired by Congressman Barry Loudermilk. He's from Georgia's 11th District. Congressman Loudermilk is such a thoughtful, methodical investigator, and he is joining us now to discuss the January 6th Select Committee's final report and the Department of Defense's Inspector General's report. Congressman, welcome to Better for America. I'm thrilled to have you with me today.
Rebecca, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Terrific. So, Congressman, the Department of Defense Inspector General's report highlights certain delays in National Guard deployment during January 6th. And we know that Donald Trump says that he called on the National Guard. Can you shed light on this newly released transcript and how it really impacts the narrative around the National Guard's role that day?
Yeah, let me kind of set the playing field here so people understand about delays. There were actually 2 delays of the National Guard deploying to the Capitol on January 6th. Now, the D.C. National Guard, unlike other states where the Guard chain of command goes to the governor, and the governor can use the Guard in law enforcement and for natural disasters and helping suppress riots. The D.C. National Guard exists for the same thing, except for their chain of command goes to the President of the United States, since there is no governor of the District of Columbia. And so the mission of the D.C. National Guard is to be the guardians of the Capitol. That is their slogan. So, and they've been used many times in the past to keep peace and to quell riots. The chain of command goes from the president. Once he decides he needs to ready the National Guard, then it goes to the Pentagon. And then the Secretary of Defense delegates that to the Secretary of the Army. So I just wanted to set that playing field there.
Very important.
As far as delays, the National Guard cannot be deployed to the Capitol because of the Constitution separation of powers. That prohibits any military force and National Guard of going to the Capitol unless they are requested by the Congress. Our founders understood that the commander-in-chief, if he had the ability just to send the army to the Capitol, he could go and take over Congress if he didn't like what they were doing. So there is that separation of powers. On the days leading up to January 6th, the Capitol Police Chief, who is then Stephen Sund, was looking at the number of people that are coming and the number of officers that he had available. Because if you remember, there was COVID at that time, and the federal government, if you had the sniffles, then you had to go quarantine yourself, right? So there were a number of officers that were quarantined. He knew he was going to be low on force. He wanted to supplement that with National Guard. So he made a couple of requests for National Guard. That request had to be approved by the Capitol Police Board, which basically gets their marching orders from the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate. So Chief Sund had made a couple of requests in the days leading up, and that request was denied because they didn't like the optics of having National Guard there. So he was denied having those additional forces on January 6th. During January 6th, when the breach of the Capitol happened, he made another request, an emergency request for National Guard assistance. That was also turned down because of optics. Now, this is like when the outer perimeters of the Capitol were being breached Folks were coming up to the Capitol. He made another request. That was turned down. Once shots were fired in the Capitol, then Nancy Pelosi decided, yes, we need the National Guard, and she approved the request to go to the Pentagon. So the initial delay in the National Guard coming was because of political decisions within the Capitol. Once the request was made around 2:30 in the afternoon, there was a discussion within the Pentagon of whether they should deploy the National Guard or not. The final decision to deploy them happened around 3 o'clock, but it wasn't until about 3 hours later that the National Guard arrived. So the question with the Department of Defense Inspector General was, what was the purpose of the 3-hour delay in actually getting the National Guard on the way? Their official report, which was represented in the Select Committee's report, which the Select Committee just took theirs at face value, was that it was the National Guard. They weren't ready. However, once we got these transcripts and we were able to identify, because if you remember, Nancy Pelosi blamed Donald Trump for all of this, even blamed Donald Trump for the National Guard not being there. He could have sent the National Guard, she said. He could have approved them to go, and he didn't. General Milley, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as you know, was not a big fan of Donald Trump. He testified under oath that on January the 3rd, Donald Trump, in a phone call, ordered the National Guard to be deployed, ready for deployment. In fact, he said that the president says, and this was his quote, the president just says, hey, look at this. There's going to be a large number of protesters here on the 6th. Make sure that you have sufficient National Guard soldiers to make sure it's a safe event. He said, I don't care if you use guard or soldiers or active duty, whatever you have to do, just make sure it's safe. This was General Milley saying on January 3rd, Donald Trump effectively ordered the National Guard to be readied. When we read that, that was kind of eye-opening to us. Okay, Donald Trump did order the National Guard ready. Once we had issued our initial report on other findings that we had, which was in March of last year, there were some whistleblowers that started contacting our office from the National Guard. And basically they said the report from the Department of Defense is a lie. They said we were already deployed. We were at the National Guard Armory with our riot gear on early that morning, just waiting for deployment. Well, when I heard that, I was like, okay, then that makes sense because Donald Trump had already ordered them to be readied. But then that didn't line up with the IG's report. So we started fighting with the Department of Defense to get all of the evidence they had that supported their report that the National Guard was at fault. We even brought 4 senior military officials from the D.C. National Guard into a hearing to testify, and they all testified the exact same thing. We were purposefully delayed by the Pentagon from going to the Capitol for political reasons. We were finally able to get the Department of Defense to give us 44 depositions, transcripts of depositions under oath by senior military and civilian officials from the Pentagon. And the evidence shows that the National Guard soldiers that testified to us were honest, that the Pentagon purposefully delayed the National Guard from deploying on January 6th.
This is just incredible. It is really arresting. So you're saying that there are key discrepancies between this new information that you're speaking of and really what the Democrats have been telling us all along, their J6 Select Committee. These are the key discrepancies, is that, in fact, we're learning this now. It seems to me, Congressman, I think you agree that the January 6th Select Committee was really a convenient springboard for Democrats' ambitions, really stopping Trump's return to the White House. Is that what it's looking like more and more?
Not only that, but also to influence the midterm congressional elections in 2022. And part of the evidence of that outside the Department of Defense, many people remember Cassidy Hutchinson, who was the Democrat star witness who worked in the White House. She had testified before the committee 3 times, and her testimonies lined up with everyone else that worked at the White House. After some communications back channel with Liz Cheney, she suddenly fired her attorney, and Liz Cheney provided her a new attorney pro bono, and she changed her testimony. And that's when she went public saying, oh, no, Donald Trump tried to take the control of the presidential SUV. because he was so mad that the Secret Service wouldn't take him to the Capitol on January 6th. It was kind of, she made other outlandish statements too. So as soon as she made that testimony, without trying to verify any of the information or corroborate her story, the Select Committee paraded her in front of America in a televised hearing where she made all of these statements public. That was in June. The first thing I would do as an investigator is corroborate her story, especially when they're as outlandish as those statements were.
Yes.
The simple thing to do is you subpoena the Secret Service driver. Okay. Well, she testified in June. They did not bring the Secret Service driver in to testify until late November, after the elections. You may be surprised, the Secret Service driver testified. That never happened. And I think they knew he would testify that, and they stonewalled him. In fact, in the beginning of his testimony, once we were able to obtain it, this is one of the documents that went missing. Once we were able to obtain this testimony, the Secret Service driver's attorney chastised the Select Committee because he said, your witness testified in June to these facts, or to her opinion, really, but she testified in June.
Right.
Me and my client reached out to you in July, August, and September to correct the record. But now it's November and you called us in. Then when they interviewed him, the Select Committee never asked him whether that incident took place or not. He had to interject it on his own, and they even tried to stop him from saying anything about it. What that shows me, one, the timing, they didn't want this to come out before the elections. And two, they never really wanted to have anything he said on record. But once he said it, it was part of the record. That's why this document went missing until we were able to find it buried over at the Department of Homeland Security. So it was not just about Trump. It was about Republicans, because if you remember, we were supposed to have this red wave in that election. This would have been devastating to them because it would have exposed their entire report as being more of fiction than fact.
It is unbelievable. And I hope everyone listening is going to share this podcast with friends and family. We have got to get the truth out there. Consequences, accountability. Congressman, what kind of consequences might we see as a result of this, your investigation of the investigation, and might anyone be held accountable in the future? I mean, is this something that, there's more work to be done down the line?
There is, and we definitely do have to have accountability, because if there's no accountability, you're going to see the same thing happen. And part of the purpose of my investigation is to get to the truth and let the American people see the truth and expose what happened and the corruption that went on and the lies, so that we can make correction to make sure it doesn't happen again. The first thing that my plan is every time we think we're about to wrap this thing up, we uncover something else. And we have to continue an investigation. But we're to the point that when Congress gets back in session, my plan is that we pass a resolution on the House to repudiate and disown and discredit, honestly, based on fact, that Select Committee report, because it should never be used as an accurate representation of what happened on January 6th or the days leading up to it. And it should never be used in litigation as it has been being used up to this point. A lot of those, the litigation against Donald Trump was based off the false narrative that is in this Select Committee report. So that's step one. Then step two is accountability. How do we hold those who purposefully and knowingly produced and propagated false information, hid documents, deleted documents, hid from the American people the truth? They need to be held accountable. Well, Congress, we have no law enforcement authority. That all goes to the Department of Justice. However, what we can do in Congress, though, is make recommendations for prosecution or other actions to the Department of Justice, especially for those who are not in Congress and those who are outside players. But I have zero trust in this administration's Department of Justice.
Sure.
It would be a futile exercise for us to make a criminal prosecution referral to the Biden-Harris Department of Justice, because what you have seen and you witness is selective litigation, selective prosecution by them, really based on political affiliation. So there is no need for this Congress to make a recommendation. However, if the election goes the way that most of us hope it goes, we'll have a new Congress coming in, still in Republican majority, and as well as the Republican Senate. But more importantly, if we have a White House, a Republican White House that is focused on justice and government reform, and we have a good Department of Justice, we'll make referrals. Because keep in mind, unlike a temporary select committee, like we have this investigating the assassination attempts on President Trump, or the select committee on January 6th, those go away at the end of the Congress. Mine is actually a subcommittee of a standing committee. So we will still be a committee in the next Congress, and we can still continue this work.
And it is so important, especially, when public trust is at all-time lows. People are very, they're questioning our government and our government oversight. So the work that you're doing is so critical. It really is so important. What message, sir, do you hope that the release of these transcripts really sends to the American people, especially to those who might feel very disillusioned, by the political handling of the January 6th investigation?
I hope that it shows the American people that our government still can work, our Congress can work, but we have to change the way that we're doing investigations and oversight. For some time, in fact, I had an investigative reporter, a very prominent one, did an interview with them. And when the interview was over, he called me and he said, I just want to tell you, this is refreshing to me, because you're conducting this oversight and investigation the way it's supposed to be done, the way it used to be done, like during the Watergate era. In modern times, most of it has been political hack jobs to push one agenda or another. They haven't been honest investigations. So I hope it shows the American people. You don't hear much out of the Democrats when we come out with this stuff, because it's not political spin. It's hard for them to defend it, because we're putting the actual documents out for the public to see. You can go to the House Administration Oversight Subcommittee's website, just Google that. You can go to it, and all of this is put out there, word for word, verbatims for everyone to see. So when we bring this stuff out, this isn't political spin. This is actual facts and data. And when you look over it, you'll see, wow, I understand now why the select committee hid this documentation, because it didn't fit into their political narrative. And so transparency is still possible in our government, but this hasn't been easy. And I tip my hat and I give a lot of appreciation to our team, the investigative team, the staff members there, because they have been relentless. Most of the documents we've been trying to recover are House documents. They belong to the House of Representatives, but the Select Committee sent them to the White House or sent them to the Homeland Security in an attempt to keep us from seeing those, because they were hoping that they would enact executive privilege. But these are House documents. We were able to get hold of those. The documents with the DOD files, those were not House documents. Those were Pentagon documents. And quite honestly, I wasn't sure we'd ever get our hands upon them. But because of the relentless work of this subcommittee, we were able to obtain all of those documents from the Pentagon. So there are people still in our government that want to make sure that justice is done, blind justice is done, without political spin. And I hope that's one of the legacies that we'll leave, and maybe rewrite the book on how to do oversight and investigations in Congress.
Well, that would be terrific. I mean, really, this has been a total insidious misuse of government power. The Democrats were fabricators here. So what you have found out, sir, about January 6th, that really is so important. We all deserve to see the evidence that contradicts what the Select Committee really put in front of us. And we've got to hold mainstream media, legacy media, and all of these outlets that have been going along with the narrative. It's been a lie since the beginning. So that's another area that it's one reason why we do this show, is to help get the truth out there. More and more people need to hear the truth. And what you are doing, sir, is very honorable. You are searching for truth. It is so important. I thank you so much for being with me.
I'd like to thank you for covering it, because we have made all this public. We do press releases, but it is totally shut down by the mainstream media. So thank you for outlets like yourself and the others that are covering this, because one of the reasons that the mainstream media is not covering this is because they can't put a spin on it, because we are using the actual documents, the actual statements, and they can't put a left-leaning spin on it, so they choose to not cover it. I just briefed a retired men's group in my local community today. They asked me to come speak and kind of give them a rundown of what I've learned. When I got done telling them a lot of what we just talked about here today, they said, "Why haven't we heard anything about this? When are you going to go to the mainstream media?" I said, "We've been going to the mainstream media since day one, but they don't want to touch it because they can't spin it." So thank you for you having the courage to stand up and at least let the American people know what's really going on.
Well, thank you again, sir. Congressman, it was a delight to have you with me. The more the U.S. House Administration Oversight Committee digs, the more you're finding. This is so important. Keep up the great work. God bless you, and thank you for being with me.
Well, thank you.
And to all of you out there listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to tell friends and family all about AMAC. We have strength in numbers. Thank you all for listening. I'm Rebecca Weber. Have a wonderful day.
We are proud to have First Fidelity Reserve as our official bullion and rare coin partner, as they have supported AMAC for over a decade. Call First Fidelity Reserve, 800-336-1630. That's 800-336-1630, and get your free 38-page precious metals guide today.
The Better for America podcast is proud to be supported by Senior Resource. At Senior Resource, the focus is on empowering seniors, retirees, and their families. That's why they created the Senior Resource Podcast Network, a platform packed with informative podcasts that educate, inspire, empower, and even entertain. Their goal is simple: to provide expert advice on topics like retirement, Medicare, senior housing, aging in place, caregiving, and much more. With a variety of shows covering all the important issues, listeners will hear from subject experts and get helpful tips to make their retirement journey the best it can be. Visit seniorresource.com/podcasts and start listening today.